He said that it had not been clear what the mission was, and it never did become clear to him. But that he thought that the mission was that he would get on the phone with the media, would talk politics, and would die by suicide by cop.
So, Jason Friedman, I ask this of every prosecutor who comes on the show, and I've yet to get an answer that convinces me. So maybe you're the guy. I want to hear it from you. It's obvious, Jason, that this defendant has a long history of mental illness. The prosecution admits that. And if he's convicted, he's going to prison, which is really not the place for a severely mentally ill person. So what are we even doing in this courtroom? Shouldn't he just be sent to a mental institution? It saves us money, time, energy, and it might salvage what's left of this mentally ill person's life.
Absolutely not, Jamie. This man clearly should be held responsible for his actions. Keep in mind, if we just put him into a psychiatric institution, or even if he's found not guilty by reason of insanity, they put him into a psychiatric institution, but he has the ability to get out. What happens if this man a couple of years down the road is deemed to be cured? He's sent back out to society again, and who knows, he might have another delusion, more voices speaking to him, and commit yet another heinous crime.
Well, given that our prisons are so full of mentally ill people, maybe we need some alternative, some third approach where he would get mental health treatment appropriately in a mental health facility, but never be eligible for release. We'll talk about that in just a bit, Jason. But let's take a look at the expert, the prosecutor.
Correctly with the Effexor and taking him off the lithium, that frankly I think that the prosecution has got a hill to climb, and Dr. Wheeler's great, as is Dr. Dunner, but it's a real insanity defense that's compelling.
Yeah, it's one of the few where the obvious history of mental illness is well established, and the defense hasn't had to spend a whole lot of time proving that up. In most cases they do. So let me come over to you, Jason, and flip the question a bit, because in Washington state the defense does have a burden to show mental illness and, in fact, insanity beyond a preponderance of the evidence. Not as heavy a burden as prosecutors have, but they've got one in this case. And as a prosecutor, do you think they've met their burden?
I don't think they've met their burden, and I think the prosecution did a very good job of disputing the findings of the defense psychiatrist. The key for the prosecutor is to be able to distinguish for the jury garden variety mental illness, which everyone agrees he has, and legal insanity, and they're two different things. And the prosecutor is going to be able to highlight using all of the conduct that preceded the actual shooting to show that although this man did have mental illness, he knew that the act of going into this establishment and pulling the trigger, shooting people, was wrong.
Yeah, it's really fascinating because you do, as Ann points out, in law we learn you have the act, actus reus, and the thought process, the intent, mens rea. And here, no one denies the act. Mr. Haq says it was me. There's no...
From the defense experts, I saw your poll with your viewers.
Yeah.
That was it 24% found the defense to be compelling.
That's
Didn't
right.
that surprise you? I mean,
no.
I thought it should be a little higher. But
it didn't surprise me because we do these polls every day, and they always stack up in favor of the prosecution. Is why we have the best defense, Ann Bremner, an effort to try and recalibrate the scales of justice. Folks do tend to be very pro-prosecution. Jason, given that you're our prosecutor today, let me ask you, what's your response to Ann's critique of this witness, and how would you handle it? Would you try and flesh that out a bit in direct so that you have a full acknowledgement of, if it's fair to say, his liabilities, or do you wait and rehabilitate him after the defense cross-examines?
Well, I think in general terms, you try to concede, small points that he's going to be cross-examined on. So I don't have a problem with him conceding that, yeah, he's a psychologist here. But keep in mind, the prosecution's not relying solely on Dr. Wheeler. They already put on a medical doctor who's talking about the interactions of the various drugs he was on. And Dr. Wheeler is there to talk about the behavior of Mr. Haq. And I think he did a very good job of explaining and differentiating between mental illness and the ability to know right from wrong.
And he's not finished yet. We expect him back on the witness stand in just a few moments, and then that cross-examination. And as you say, he interviewed Mr. Haq shortly after the shootings and is really here to talk about what motivated Haq's behavior. He disagrees with defense experts that Mr. Haq was in a manic episode. Let's take you back.
But Jamie, with the burden on the defense to prove by preponderance that Haq was insane, it's going to be really tough if they do indeed cancel each other out. They're all impressive. They all have great credentials. I would just say one thing that's going to hurt the defense. Dr. Missick conceded that reasonable minds could differ, and another expert could well find the opposite of what he testified to, and that well could be reasonable. I felt like that was almost like a game over moment for the defense.
The game over moment is never a good one for the defense. Jason, let me come to you on this. If it is a battle of the experts, do you agree that they tend to cancel one another out? And if so, who do you think benefits?
They don't necessarily cancel each other out, and it really matters how they do on cross-examination and how their credibility comes across to the jury. The other thing that I'll say is when the experts are very close in terms of their credibility and their expertise, it's really where the art of the advocacy comes in, because the summations, the lawyers each get a chance to sum up in front of that jury, and at that point they really get to, make their arguments as persuasive as possible. And when it's a very close call between the experts, the closing argument usually makes all the difference.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because in many other cases where you don't have experts, where you have eyewitnesses, for example, or confessions, whether they're false or true confessions, it's less about the lawyering. But I think you're right, Jason, in this case, very much about the advocacy, which gives us a lot to look forward to. We can also look forward, as Jason pointed out.
There was no, there's no evidence in these notes that he was in the midst of a manic episode. And the only thing that remotely conceivably would allude to that is the psychomotor agitation, which, by the way, occurs in depression and manic episodes. So it doesn't, in and of itself, it doesn't distinguish mania from depression, but it certainly seemed like a relatively minor incidental symptom at that point.
So there you see the key expert for the prosecution in this case. And let me jump out to Jason Friedman. Jason, we've got emails from folks asking why the prosecution has Dr. Wheeler testifying in rebuttal rather than in the case in chief. Do you have an answer for that?
The most probable answer is they didn't know what the defense was going to put on in their case in chief. And a lot of times, you want to save a rebuttal witness to help really solidify your case in chief. You don't necessarily put all of your direct evidence in because you can have an opportunity to rebuttal, to put on a rebuttal case. And they felt that Dr. Wheeler was going to do a very good job. And from what I've seen, I think he has. Yeah,
both as a matter of strategy, and you have to rebut as a matter of law and facts what the defense has put up. So it makes a lot of sense that Wheeler would come at this point, and this is what we expected. Let's take a look